32 the autumn, I decided to test what silence really sounded like. Not the kind you get between traffic lights, but the kind that lives where maps turn pale and the trail lines stop pretending to help. I chose Sarek, far up in Swedish Lapland, because every forum said the same thing. No waymarks, no huts, no crowds. Bring your own judgment and enough humility to carry it. I covered my kitchen table with fjellkarten sheets, tracing out a loop that slipped between high valleys and skirted a ridge of glacial erratics. I wrote a little stack of notes and even found an old tourist pamphlet in a used bookshop. Sarek, Beyond the Roots, paper gone soft at the folds, as if a lot of hands had read it and not many had listened. My brother Callum watched me coil guy lines. "You know you're auditioning to be the voiceover in your own missing person documentary, right?" he said. I told him to keep his phone on anyway. I started walking under a sky the color of tin. The trailhead wasn't a trailhead so much as a lay-by with a tilted sign and a path rubbed into the tundra by feet that didn't care about being counted. The air smelled like stone and lichen and rain threatening to happen later. I hesitated, then shouldered the pack and stepped into the dwarf birch, letting it close behind me with that whispery, papery sound it makes when it brushes your sleeves. The first day was exactly what I had come for. 12 miles without a voice I hadn't brought. A river laid itself out in pale braids through the valley. I passed the stub of an old hearth ring half swallowed by moss, a fence post sunk into peat, and a chimney of stacked stones with nothing to warm. I made camp in a shallow hollow between 3 boulders, close to a ribbon of water thin enough to sing. The wind dropped after dusk. Without plains or roads, the quiet felt like someone holding their breath and inviting you to try. Morning brought a sheet of mist that had curled itself around the ground like a cat. Coffee steam looked solid in the cold. I followed a narrow gully up valley and found a length of rusted chain looped over a rock, links fused into one long wound. Nearby, in a pocket scraped clear of leaf litter, sat a small pile of clean bones. Reindeer, I told myself, because that word was reasonable. On my way back, I noticed a mound where the earth should have been smooth, freshly turned, the soil dark and damp, no roots sown through it. The sight crawled up my arms. I stood there too long, then decided I was making a story where none belonged and walked away. That evening, a slow pressure settled in my chest, the way weather arrives even when apps say it won't. I built a tighter fire than I needed and sat with my back to the warmest stone, telling myself I would hear anything that loved the dark enough to come close. Somewhere after midnight, a voice woke me, low, close. It said my name through the tent mesh, perfectly ordinary, as if it expected an answer. I unzipped and stepped out with a knife in my fist and the headlamp throwing a bright, accusing circle. The boulders leaned in and pretended to have always been there. The stream pretended it had always sounded the way it sounded. No prints, no drag marks, no scuffs. At dawn, I searched for an explanation and found none. I folded the voice into a dream and promised myself I'd keep it there. By the 3rd night, pride had gotten louder than sense. I fed the fire until it painted light halfway up the rocks and the sparks climbed and gave up. Sleep slipped its hand over my eyes without asking. Breathing woke me, not wind, not animal snuffling. Slow, steady, deliberate breathing from the other side of the boulder I was leaning against, as if the rock were a wall and someone stood with their face inches from mine, separated by stone and patience. I didn't turn. Fear pinned me in that neat, efficient way it has when it means business. I held my breath until my lungs took over for themselves. The coals collapsed into a red map of their own, and the breathing did not change. I counted. I prayed to nothing. I pictured myself spinning and slashing and running, and I believed none of it. When the first light thinned the sky to gray, the breathing stopped. Not faded, stopped. I stood on legs that felt borrowed and looked for the thing I already knew I wouldn't find. The ash showed my prints and the fall of sparks. The dirt was a clean story of weather and insects, nothing else. Something had been 2 feet from my skull for hours and chose to leave me the exact amount of proof that keeps a person honest and useless. I packed without caring how it fit. The straps twisted. The zip didn't bite all the way. I walked by memory more than map. Glancing back so often it felt like another kind of walking. The air had that used quality, like a room after a fight. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Then I stopped dead. A mile from the road, in the center of the path where my boot had just lifted, a single print sat clean and deep. Not mine. Larger by 2 sizes at least. Heel, arch, toe, all clear as if cast. No let-in, no follow-on. Just one step pressed into the world and nothing before or after it, like the person had stepped out of the air, put their weight down to make a point, and stepped back into whatever was standing behind that boulder, breathing like time had no meaning. I ran. No brave glances over the shoulder, no calculated use of the last of my water. The car looked smaller than I remembered. I locked the doors like a child and drove until the mountains were flat in the mirror and my jaw ached. People ask if I'll ever go back to Sarek. The answer is that I still sleep in tents, but only with other people's lantern light leaking under the fly and other people's jokes making me braver than I am. I learned something about silence out there that I can't unknow. If you chase absolute solitude hard enough, you eventually find out what has been listening to you, patiently, the whole time you were practicing how to be alone.